Hey, welcome back to YT Finance, and today we are talking about Palantir Technologies PLTR stock and Nano Dimensions NNDM stock. We will start by discussing why Cathie Wood of Ark Invest is buying up even more Palantir and Nano Dimension shares, and we will also go over some of the other stocks that Cathie Wood bought to hedge her ETFs against a volatile stock market. Then we will talk about why institutional investors are buying up PLTR shares and why retail investors seem to be selling Palantir. Lastly, we will discuss why investors believe that Palantir may pull back very heavily, so stay tuned. Go and press the like button right now for more PLTR stock and NNDM stock news updates. Comment your thoughts down below about why you think retail investors are selling Palantir stock. Turn on all subscription notifications to stay informed on the newest stock market trades and news. And now let's get right into today's stories. The overall stock market had one of the worst trading days of the year recently, but it has since recovered some of its losses. However, Cathie Wood of Ark Invest used this as a great buying opportunity to buy up her high conviction stock plays, and to reallocate her ETFs so they can better withstand future stock market volatility. Lately, Ark's ARKQ ETF has performed the best with a gain of 0.7% on the same day that other Ark ETFs were falling. For example, the ARKG ETF fell around 1.4%. So let's see how Cathie Wood shuffled her ETFs to make them stand up against these market headwinds. One of my favorite things about Cathie Wood and Ark Invest is that they post their trades at the end of every trading session, and this allows stock traders and retail investors to use this information to our advantage by adding our own spin on Cathie's investments. Let's start with Ark's FinTech Innovation ETF, ticker symbol ARKF, which focuses on financial technology companies of the future. Some of this ETF's largest holdings are companies like Square, Zillow, Pinterest, PayPal, and Alibaba. Cathie Wood's most interesting additions to her ETF were over 35,000 shares of Twilio, more than 342,000 shares of Robinhood, which has gotten extremely beaten down just as I predicted, and around 62,000 shares of Discovery. Next up, we have one of my personal favorite Ark ETFs, which is the Ark Genomic Revolution Etf, ticker symbol ARKG, which mainly focuses on innovative healthcare companies like Pacific Biosciences, Teladoc Health, CRISPR, and Fate Therapeutics. Some of Cathie Wood's most recent purchases for this ETF includes the likes of 112,000 shares of Surface Oncology, close to 116,000 shares of Schrödinger, 123,000 shares of One Life Health, and she bought even more shares of Adaptive Bio, which equated to almost 30,000 shares. Next up on our list, we have the Ark Innovation ETF, ticker symbol ARKK, which covers a multitude of industries and companies like Tesla, Roku, and Spotify, just to name a few. Cathie Wood then added to this ETF by purchasing over 62,000 shares of Trimble, close to 420,000 shares of Pacific Biosciences, and around 572,717 shares of Robinhood stock. The next Ark ETF is ARKQ, which is Cathie Wood's Autonomous Technology and Robotics ETF, which has very large companies in it like Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, Baidu, Tesla, and Iridium. Cathie Wood added over 102,000 shares of Blade Air Mobility, almost 120,000 shares of Mark Forged, and she also added more to the star of this video, Palantir Technologies, by adding more than 475,000 shares just to this single ETF. Next up, we have the Ark Next Generation Internet ETF, ticker symbol ARKW, which focuses on disruptive internet and technology companies. Some of the outstanding companies in this ETF are Meta Platforms, Snapchat, and Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. Cathie Wood added 367,949 shares of Nano Dimension and 45,574 shares of Veracity. Now, here is some exciting news about Nano Dimension. I have now started an NNDM stock position at an average cost of about $4.67, and even though I think the stock could go lower, it's low enough to where I find value in its opportunity to potentially explode in the future. However, I did not overexpose myself too much to this stock, so I would hold on to this play long term because it's not going to cost me much even if I entered at the wrong price. The final Ark ETF that I will go over is the Ark Space Exploration and Innovation Etf, ticker symbol ARKX, which focuses on investing into companies that develop technology for spaceflight. Some of the most recognizable companies in this ETF are Trimble, Kratos, and Nvidia, and Cathie Wood recently purchased around 60,000 shares of Iridium Communications. If we look at Cathie Wood's overall portfolio that combines all of her Ark ETFs into one, we see that Nano Dimension ranks as number 62 by portfolio weight. Ark owns around 8% of the company, and if we look at Ark's holdings of Nano Dimension stock, it's currently worth at a market value of around $100 million. Now let's go over and move to Palantir, which ranks as number 13 in her portfolio. Ark owns about 1.85% of Palantir Technologies, but their holdings have a market value of around $743 million. Palantir is also in a load of Ark ETFs, including the ARKG ETF, the ARKW ETF, the ARKX ETF, ARKQ, ARKK, and ARKF ETFs. So why did Cathie Wood buy Palantir, and why are other institutions buying up PLTR? Well, for starters, Palantir has become a lot cheaper recently because their stock price has fallen by around 25%. However, not just Palantir has become cheaper, most growth stocks have actually pulled back recently. But despite this pullback, institutions, and Ark Invest included, use this as a buying opportunity to pick up even more PLTR shares. To me, it's no surprise to see institutions buy up Palantir Technologies after this pullback on top of their impressive Q3 earnings report, which was probably the cherry on top for most of these institutions. Now, this does not explain why some retail investors are actually selling their PLTR stock, so let's take a look at that. According to this article, retail investors used to hold up to around 60% ownership of Palantir Technologies, but that number has since fallen about 6% down to retail now only owning 54% of the company. But on the other hand, institutions have increased their positions in Palantir because institutional ownership used to be 24% and now it's around 31%. What I think happened is that retail investors got impatient with Palantir, and after they held their stock for a year while it traded sideways, when it dropped, they exited their positions in frustration, and institutions then bought the dip. This is why it's good to a degree to have high conviction and confidence in your stock plays and research it thoroughly, otherwise you probably shouldn't even hold that stock or company. Another reason for this is that institutions tend not to sell their stock based on short-term news like retail investors will. And because more institutional investors now own the stock, the PLTR stock price will be slightly less volatile. More good news is that Palantir's intrinsic value ranges from $25 to $31, so if your average cost basis is below $25 for Palantir stock and you plan to hold it for over 2 years, that is a really good position to be in. Now, while hedge funds don't particularly like Palantir and not many hedge funds own Palantir stock, at least the insiders of Palantir hold a good amount of the company. And this is good news because if the management of the company holds a lot of stock in the company, they believe that the stock price is going to be worth more in the future than it is today. For instance, one of its co-founders named Peter Thiel, which you should be familiar with, owns almost 7% of the company alone, and the CEO, along with other executives, own anywhere from 2.5% to 5.9% of outstanding shares, which is very encouraging to see. But in the long run, it will not be the insiders or institutional ownership that investors really want to see. The thing that investors want to see is a growth trajectory over time for Palantir's revenues, earnings, and stock price. And that's the thing that's going to follow from Palantir's current trajectory. However, in the short term, there will be volatility, which is why investors should have at least a 2-year outlook on the stock. Otherwise, they shouldn't waste their time, in my opinion, unless they want to trade the stock short term off of this volatility. Apparently, a machine learning algorithm says Palantir only has a 36% chance to rally over the next 3 weeks. So, to say it another way, there is a 64% chance that Palantir will fall lower or trade sideways. days. However, their machine learning algorithms and most machine learning algorithms do not take into consideration news or upcoming catalysts, so keep that in mind. But comment what you think down below. Don't forget to like this video right now, subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in the next YT video.